This is the Benefits Buzz Podcast, your weekly pulse on what's happening in the world of employee benefits. Brought to you by your friends at WEX, who believe in simplifying benefits for everyone. Now listen up and let's get buzzed! Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Benefits Buzz. I'm your host, Eric Pila. I am joined by this guy, Hayden Goethe. What's up, Hayden?
Not much, Eric. Not much. We're winding down the Spark Marathon of Benefits Buzz podcast, which is pretty exciting.
Yes, you're of course referencing our special edition where we are here in Hollywood, Florida. Thus the neon pink shirt. This usually isn't in my wardrobe, but I thought I had to dress the part.
Yeah, it's definitely in your wardrobe.
Oh, okay, you're fine. Way to call me out.
I've seen that shirt before.
Yeah. Who asked you, Hayden? Well, we're so excited. We're here live at our Spark conference for our partners, and we have some of our great ELT team that happens to be here. And we thought, you know what? Let's bring them on the podcast and have some really good conversations around benefits. And this is going to be a great one. I am joined with Laura Shen. She is our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer here at WEX. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eric and Hayden.
Yeah, thank
Excited
you
to be
for
here.
joining us.
Yes, well, we're excited to have you. This is going to be great. And of course, diversity and inclusion, such an important topic and one that we're so excited to bring to Benefits Buzz. I know every HR pro should have this top of mind, is thinking about this, and so I can't wait to, I hate to use the term, but pick your brain about what it means and its importance in the office. So before we get there, let's have our audience get to know you a little bit. Tell us about yourself and why diversity and inclusion has been so important to you.
Yeah, so I'm Laura Shen. I've been at WEX for 3 years, so I'm the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, but prior to that, I ran strategy for one of our lines of business. So I think the really special part about being in this role is one, it's new for WEX, so getting to create it and create that vision and execute on that strategy. But also having known the organization for 3 years, I think being able to do something that's authentic to WEX. It's a journey, and having seen the journey play out and being to be part of charting that course in the future is really exciting for me.
Yeah, regarding this topic of like diversity and inclusion, like what is there anything like during your life or anything that made you really passionate about this, where you knew that this is where I wanted my career to be?
Yeah, I saw the questions beforehand, so it really gave me time to think about why has it always been, it's been part of who I am since I was born. I think about my upbringing, so my dad's Asian, my mom's white, and so that notion of being like, if you check the box, it's 2 or more races. And what that's meant to me, I grew up in New Hampshire where I was one of 2 Asian kids in my class, and so the notion of being one or some of the only was always something that was part of my identity, but it was also something that my parents very much embraced in our community of what does it mean. I think at the time, instead of diversity and inclusion, it was multiculturalism.
Sure.
And so, flash forward to my professional life, I think there's always been for me this notion of what does diversity, inclusion, and equity mean in the workplace. Sure. And I felt a responsibility, whether it's women and gender, whether it's race and ethnicity, to be part of those conversations so that it's really on employees. Yes, it's great to be in this role and be able to, put out what that strategy is, but it's also on employees to own that and be part of that conversation because community is important. And creating that space for not just safe, but also brave conversations for me is what makes my role so special.
Yeah, you talked about the term diversity inclusion and kind of the new phrase for that, and I'd love to hear this. There's a great attention around it, which is much needed. So, have you seen changes? Have you seen more focus? Have you seen more conversations? And what are some of the results you're seeing because of the new attention on diversity and inclusion? And
I think what's important too is to define those terms for folks because when I think about diversity, it's about celebrating differences here at WEX. And differences not just in how people look or appear, which I think is like the visible diversity, but also the other types of invisible diversity, whether it's backgrounds, job experiences, whether you're a caregiver, parental or elder care, veteran status. There's just so many ways to think about it, which is really vibrant, and bring those identities to life and understanding that difference makes us stronger is really what I think about when I think about diversity. When I think about inclusion, it's how do you create that sense of belonging and making sure that everyone feels like they can bring their full and authentic self to work. And then, there's this notion too of equity is how do we create practices and a workplace where everyone has the same access to opportunities to be able to thrive both professionally and then personally with the benefits we offer.
I love that. Thank you for defining that. I think that's a really important thing to do because, we got so eager, we jumped right in. So thank you for pausing and doing that. It's really important. And you made a comment about, I think companies are the best when everyone has a chance, right, to speak their mind and to have a voice. And so I think it's good to clarify what we're actually talking about. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in front of you. But.
No, that's perfect. there's so much talk. Again, we've already like talked a little bit about the Great Resignation, but like, hiring is at such a premium right now, and so many employers are like trying to find help. Just thinking about this topic, I mean, you've talked about diversity, like, biases can show up in any number of ways. They can be very subtle, not so subtle. How do you have any advice for like our HR professionals listening, just in terms of like how to reduce or eliminate, biases in hiring practices?
Of course, it's something that I've thought a lot about in partnership with our talent acquisition team, but also our leaders. I think there's this commitment from the highest levels at WEX of like, we want to be more inclusive. What does that mean in practice? And so working with the teams to identify, when we think about inclusive hiring practices, I think about it in 3 categories. There's the search, there's the interview, and then there's the job offer and follow-up. And when we think about the search, how are we increasing our aperture for talent? Some companies might be based in locations that have been, historically, white or whatnot. I think there's opportunity in this flexible new work environment that has changed over the past 2 years to think about how do we look for talent that might not be where we're physically based, and how do we take advantage of it? I think the Great Resignation creates a lot of challenges for the business, but from a DE&I standpoint, it creates a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of roles to fill, and how do you think about increasing that area that we search for talent? And then I think thinking about our job descriptions, how are we creating inclusive job descriptions and looking for skill sets versus experiences that might have implicit bias there. And then thinking about just how we start to frame up that interview process. Like if we go over to that next bucket is, how are we thinking about the diversity of the people who are interviewing? How are we creating an area of comfort and reflecting that which we want to recruit back in? How are we thinking about standardization? So limiting, I know that school, that's great, like that, like familiarity bias. How do you think about stock questions, and how do you think about scoring so that some of the assessment when you come together as a group is, okay, this is what we quantified based on the skill sets we were looking for. And in those conversations is naming bias. So like, I know I come with this perspective, and that'll jade my conversation, but I want to just call it out. And then on the job offer and interview, or job offer and follow-ups, is how do you think about pay equity? It's something that WEX has been committed to and does internal and external audits. How do we think about the onboarding experience and making sure that onboarding experience makes someone feel that immediate sense of belonging and culture? So those are just a few tips and tricks.
Those were awesome.
Way.
Like, I think we had a whole podcast episode just right there. Those are so great. Thank you for sharing. I think that's really enlightening for a lot of our listeners. Hayden, you always do a good job of pulling data for this. And one of the things is over 1/3 of HR leaders said in a recent survey that DE&I is a top priority for them in 2022. What areas are you most focused on specifically?
Yeah, I think acknowledging that this is a journey and that we aren't perfect, but we're committed to it is something I like to start off and say, because I think the expectation, you have a chief diversity inclusion officer, you have executive commitment, you're going to be perfect. You're not. Right. And so for me, it's also thinking about what are the big boulders we want to move, as well as like what are the tangible actions that I can take, that leaders can take each day to create meaningful change on their teams. And so when I think about my boulders for the year, I think about, first off is thinking about data and leadership aspirations. How do we think about data, create a baseline for where we are and to measure progress from? And how do we think about diversity in the data we capture about individuals so that we can understand more about, self-identification and what people want to disclose about themselves so that we can build more inclusive practices and benefits. The second one is around this inclusive culture. When we did our employee survey this year, inclusivity was the top response when it free-formed asked, describe WEX in 3 words. I think 20% of respondents said inclusive.
Wow.
And so for me, I think for me and others, it was, okay, we have the basis of which to build for. How do we continue to build that muscle? And so it's top down and bottoms up. How are we equipping managers with an inclusive toolkit of here behaviors, not just as it relates to purely diversity inclusion, but just inclusion of thought? How do we create psychological safety? And then on the bottom end, the bottom up is how are we thinking about new ways of listening? Employee expectations have changed, and how do we continue to not just do an annual survey, but check in across the year, pulse check, do skip levels with the next layer down from managers to see like what's it like on the ground. The third is about elevating our employee resource groups. At WEX, we have 9 employee resource groups, which are just incredibly organic and like they're just communities of people who might identify a certain way, or allies who are really supportive and want to learn and support groups that might be underrepresented in our communities. So for us, it's about elevating them, not just to do incredible program, but also to advocate and help move WEX in the direction that we want to see. Like, what is the WEX of the future, and how can we work with the WEX vets or work with Latinx?
I was just going to ask you, could you give like 1 or 2 examples?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the things we've been working on is with talent acquisition in the employee resource groups of where can we influence the talent acquisition strategy. So we are working with Latinx of how do we target historically Hispanic and Latinx universities. With the WEX veterans group is how do we, we did a pilot last year on military spouses and how to like partner with organizations there. With women in tech, we're partnering with Girls Who Code this summer to launch cohorts, and I don't know, I can keep going on.
No, that's great. These are all great examples. I wanted to give them some tangible examples so they could hear it, and those were fantastic. You've got just a little bit on your plate, I can hear, Laura.
And then the final priority is just thinking of it, because I love fours, I love frameworks. So elevating to ERGs to just embedding diversity, equity, inclusion in all that we do within an HR business. So from talent acquisition and those partnerships with the ERGs to talent management, like at the end of the day, diversity, it's about talent acquisition, it's about developing the talent we have, and it's about retaining the talent we have. And so how can we think about what we do in HR in a way that allows us to do that better?
That's great.
Thinking back to like the subtlety point, I would assume that most companies are probably not like deliberately trying to not be as diverse or as inclusive as they could be. Do you have any suggestions in terms of how employers should be evaluating how diverse and inclusive their workplaces are?
Yeah, I think metrics, as someone who came from the business, I love a good metric. And I think at the end of the day, it's about people though. So I think there's this balance too of being very metric driven to understanding like how employee sentiment is changing. So when I think about diversity, there's what we can measure. So for example, in the US, we can measure gender and we can measure race and ethnicity. So in our DEI report that we put out last month, we put out like we're 55% women across actually the globe. We can measure that globally. And then within the US, we're 18% employees of color. And so that just gives us a baseline of that's who we are right now. I would say, we've been traditionally located in locations that are predominantly white. And I think it's an opportunity for us right now to think about how do we bring in talent and increase that aperture in ways that we haven't in the past. So I think that's one metric, is just looking at the numbers. And then I also think there's a sense of inclusion, and I think that's where you get to the employee survey. You also start to get to like those informal ways of listening of like, what I love is when I talk with our ERG leaders is what are those mission moments? Tell me about a collaboration amongst the ERGs that really made someone think differently, made someone feel more included. And I think those are the things that balance out for me of like what brings me joy in the little moments. Because it's a lot of work, as you can tell, but I think it's being able to, those are the little things in a day versus the boulders.
Absolutely. Those are such good, again, like really solid examples. You were going to say something?
Oh yeah, no, I love it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that we're focusing on the proactive things I think that organizations can do and for HR employers to think about. At the same time, there are unfortunately times where we have to be reactive, where perhaps there's someone in an organization who's being culturally insensitive or whatever the situation may be. Yeah. What advice do you have for our listeners that may be encountering that on the best way to address that or to prevent it?
Again, humans are not perfect. We're not like perfect at all this. This is a journey. And I think we've definitely run into cases where, there are situations that play out. And I think first of all with, whether it's an individual or a team, it's trying to understand intention. I think oftentimes, particularly in the workplace, it's not of malintent. It's, they didn't know, there's some ignorance there. And so part of it is around intent, understanding, and education. I think one of the phrases I've heard recently in DEI is how to call in versus call out. And how to bring in people to that conversation, how to educate, how to understand the empathy that goes on in those situations versus feeling like it's us versus them. Yeah. I think that notion of inclusion is really where I want to lead with, is like inclusion helps us understand diversity better, which leads to more equitable outcomes.
I love that. That's great. Just thinking about, the work you're doing is so important, and I'm learning so much just having this conversation. This has been great. How do you have any like advice in terms of like actually sharing, the fruits of your labor or the type of results that you're getting, both from somebody in your role or even for HR professionals? Like, how do you share that out to like employees and supervisors to kind of let them know like what you're seeing?
Yeah, no, it's none of this is done in the silo, and I feel like half my job sometimes is sales and marketing because it's really about bringing the rest of the organization in. And so I think about it again, both sides of the coin is making sure that leadership is well aware in terms of like monthly updates and dashboards and having that direct line of contact into them, as well as understanding where the organization, what existing channels there are that they're using. So we have leadership meetings with people managers and vice presidents, and how do I plug my content into there? We have quarterly town halls and monthly town halls with some of the business units. How can I continue to provide content there so it becomes the norm, and it's like, oh, Laura, what's the latest for this month? Like, how can we include that? And just those conversations have really started to pick up, and it was great. I got on. Carlos will love this. So Carlos, our CEO of the Americas, I got on their Asia call. So I went to bed, woke up for a portion of the evening, and then went back. But out of that meeting came, oh, I didn't know we did pay equity. Like, can we learn more because we wanted to report that to the government? Or when I tuned in for the call with the European Town Hall, oh, I shared our diversity, equity, inclusion report with our regulators, and they were very impressed. So I think there's notions about how this can become the vernacular and the norm that excites me, and I think allows it not just to rely on me. I think it builds accountability within the rest of the organization.
Yeah, I knew this was going to be an impactful episode. This has been great so far. I want to keep this conversation going, even beyond the podcast. What suggestions do you have to keep employers or HR professionals or if supervisors too to stay engaged and keep this conversation of the importance of this within an organization?
Yeah, I think it's the small things. It's having the conversations and starting to build that muscle, but also take advantage of all the resources out there. What I love about this space is it's not a zero-sum game. People aren't trying to hoard what they do. Like, they're really willing to talk about it. So I think what's been great with WEX right now in this moment is, we're at Spark. We're having a session on diversity and equity inclusion with our partners. And so being able to share, I just got out of that earlier this afternoon, is, what are you doing? Oh, you're doing this. Oh, we do something similar, but I like that idea. And so starting to create that conversation in the spaces we show up as professionally, I think is this new norm. And so being able to do that with customers, whether it's our best practices from an HR standpoint, whether it's supplier diversity, and then doing it as a public company. The data's out there, and so take advantage of it.
I have two questions left, and I feel like they're kind of related, so I'm just going to tie them into
Go
one.
for
it. Is there anything that typically gets overlooked when we're talking about diversity and inclusion in your experience? And I guess as part of that, are there any final takeaways you have for our audience? Is there anything that we've overlooked in setting this up?
I think I touched on a lot of it, but I think I would just leave the listeners out there with, like, at the end of the day, you can have the metrics, but it is about the people. It's about thinking about how you can create an environment where everyone feels like they can belong and bring their full self to work. And I think it's just been interesting over the past 2 years of, what employee expectations of employers are. And people are leaving companies because of culture, but people are also joining companies because of culture. So how does DEI become part of your culture in a way that makes it attractive and it makes it a place where people want to be and they are excited by the work? And we didn't talk about it, but I think why is DEI important at WEX? And I think that's been something that's been really important for us as a business and a leadership team to get really clear on. And so for us, it's table stakes for us. Like, it is the new norm, it is what employees expect. Like, it is what we should be doing. Two, it's thinking about, like, diverse teams perform better. When we think about the growth aspirations of WEX, it's about bringing diverse voices and perspectives and backgrounds and experiences to the table to be able to be on that hockey stick curve that we are on. And then third, it's about increasing our aperture. Like, by focusing on diversity, we increase our access to talent and revenue opportunities. It's good for business. And then finally, we're seeing an enormous pressure from shareholders, investors, of which we're ahead of the trend, but we continue to see it as a momentum builder for us to continue to do what we do.
That's right. I knew there'd be 4 of them.
Yes, exactly. I
had
like
a
4.
hunch.
I think in PowerPoint slides.
That's great.
Ta-da.
And they were all awesome. We asked for 1 and we got 4.
Yeah.
That's why I love you as a guest, Laura. This has been so good. Thank you so much. Like I said, I knew this was a really important episode to do, and I was so happy that we were able to have you come on the show and just share the great things that you're working on here at WEX. I know our listeners have been thinking about this, and any opportunity they can just to learn and hear what other companies are doing is great for them. So thanks for sharing your story with us. So.
Thank you. And people can feel free to reach out to me as well. So look me up on LinkedIn or email me, and I'm happy to have that conversation.
That'd be great.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks again, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you.
WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.